You're listening to Tony Graham on Binjang 91.5. And there's been quite a controversy this week in relation to what's been going on with council, particularly in relation to the water supply that was or is, and the water supply that was supposed to be but isn't. So I've got the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, Matthew Dickinson, on the line, who I have to say is not terribly happy about the situation. How are you going there, Matthew?
Yeah, good, thanks, Tony. Certainly had better times, but we have to deal with these things and then keep looking forward, and that's all we can do with them, really.
Yeah, well, we'll hit the first topic first, and that's the fluoridation of the Dubbo urban area's water supply. Of course, this doesn't affect Wellington, but it's a very serious matter to have had the Dubbo water supply. I mean, I've got a daughter who lives there, for example, not being chlorinated for 3.5 years after it had been raised as an issue by council workers to the management of that council, which was the previous council, I should point out, at the time, would have to be just unbelievable, I'd have to say.
I would like to not believe it, Tony, but unfortunately what you're saying is correct. Fluoride has not been added to the Dubbo Water Treatment Plant since January 2019. And you're quite correct. Our operational staff did all the right things. They reported it through to the senior management of council, reported it through their directors. The CEO was obviously aware of it, reported it through to New South Wales Health. I've actually read 2 of the annual reports that went through to New South Wales Health that pointed out in the executive summary and in the body of the report the fact that fluoride wasn't going into the water supply. But unfortunately, the upper management of council chose to ignore that. And this is the thing that disappoints me the most, Tony, is the breach of trust. The community has trust in its council to be doing the things that it thinks it should be doing. They trust the community trusts that the council will pick up their garbage bins on the day they're meant to pick it up. They pick up the bins and they see that they've been emptied. That's great. They also trust that the water supply they get when they turn the tap on is treated to the appropriate standards. And everyone is aware that fluoride has been added to the water and has been added to the water for a long period of time at the correct levels. And there's an upper and a lower limit that fluoride should be added to the water. In fact, there's a whole act of parliament associated with this. It's called the Fluoridation of Public Water Supplies Act 1957, number 58. And when you read through that document, which I didn't know I would ever need to read through that document, but I now have, Section 6B talks about fluoride in the water supply, and if you stop putting fluoride in the water supply, it is a breach of that act. Now, it's understandable if you have a breakdown, as happened in January 2019, a breakdown of a piece of equipment, the process would be that obviously you have that piece of equipment repaired as quickly as possible, but most importantly, you have discussions with your community to let them know that this is what's happening. So if people want to keep putting fluoride in their kids' water, they can go and buy some fluoride tablets and add that. They can take appropriate action. But for the public not to know about this for 3.5 years, it is inconceivable. It's unbelievable. It's a terrible breach of the trust the community has in its council.
Well, I think the public deserves to know who was in the management team at the time this happened, particularly when we're talking about the CEO and the mayor. So who was in the saddle when that happened?
Well, certainly what I'd prefer to talk about, Tony, is that it wasn't the current CEO. Murray Wood's the current CEO. It wasn't Murray, and it certainly wasn't the current mayor. Myself, as the mayor of the council, and ultimately the mayor and councillors are the board of directors, if you like, of council. They're ultimately responsible for this behaviour as well. So it's been obviously previous mayor, previous general manager or CEO, and not the current ones. It's our job now to fix these problems, and that's the real issue going forward. We've got to fix these issues that have been left by the previous upper management of council.
Mm. Now, the next concerning item is that thing I mentioned earlier on about the non-delivery of water. Now, there was a pipeline built. It cost very close to $5 million, a cross-city pipeline that was meant to deliver secondary or second-grade water, you might say, or recycled water from the sewage system into the playing fields around Dubbo to save water. Now, apparently, this project was built, the money was spent, and when they went to turn the tap on, the EPA decided, and that's the government body that decides these matters, said that it's not going to happen because the water is unsuitable to be putting on those fields because of its quality. The fact that it would be sprayed over the aquifer would be endangering public health because it could easily find its way back into the potable water system. And we're talking about things like viruses, and we're talking about things like cryptosporidium, which is a sort of a subclass of bacteria, which causes things like hepatitis and all sorts of other issues. So how could it be that a whole project, which has been built from a grant from the state government, be built without any checks and balances occurring here to prevent this sort of thing happening, particularly when it's a very well-known situation in relation to the quality of water in this country, about what the authorities will allow, and it's been a subject of many debates about why we're not using more of our secondary grade water for agriculture and these sorts of things. And that debate's been had out in the public arena. It's well known. No engineer, no public health official in council surely could not know about this situation being a potential problem.
Tony, one of the simple processes that we as a council would say to our community is make sure you get your approvals in place before you go and do your construction. If someone tried to put a garage on their home or build a new home before they got the approvals in place, council could possibly say to that particular person, you've got to pull down that garage because the approvals were not in place and you're not going to get the approvals. So it's a pretty simple process, you would think, to make sure you've got all your approvals in place before you go ahead and actually construct something. Now, this was all part of the drought response. $30 million was given to council for the drought response and to try and make the community more drought resilient, make it able to handle a drought better. So the logic of what they were doing was sound. We use bore water and river water to put water on our playing fields. When you get to the stage when you've got an extreme drought, you might want as much of that bore water and river water to go into our drinking water as possible to keep producing drinking water. But what do you do with your playing fields? They're incredibly expensive if you let them go brown and effectively die off, and then you need to get them back to an appropriate standard after a drought, and that's we're talking about possibly millions of dollars there. So the idea was put forward to build this pipeline from the sewage treatment plant across to effectively near the water treatment plant to take the effluent from there across to those playing fields. Now, that's always been an issue. Using effluent anywhere has been an issue, so you've always got to get approvals from the government. Section 60 of the Local Government Act 1993, Section 292 of the Water Management Act 2000. You need to get approvals via those mechanisms for a local government water utility to get the approvals from DPE water and basically consult with public health to make sure that you get those approvals in place. I've read reports that went to councillors during this process that identified that these things needed to be completed to be able to use the effluent, to use the sewage water. So there was no question in my mind that the staff and councillors were fully aware that these processes had to occur. In those papers, I've also read that it may need additional treatment. When the water comes out of the sewage treatment plant, it's obviously at a lower standard than drinking water. In particular, you've got endocrine disruptors in the water, and that's basically medicines that people might take that ends up in the sewage treatment plant, but it is effluent treated to a certain standard but not to a drinking standard. So if you're going to go through that process, you need to possibly treat it higher. There was a suggestion in one report that I read going back several years that said that if we needed to do that, if DPE in fact said we needed to treat it to that higher standard, then the sewage treatment plant could have an additional piece of equipment fitted to the sewage treatment plant to treat that water to a higher standard at a cost of $9 million. So it was identified that building this $5 million pipeline may require an additional $9 million as a part of that approval process. Now you would have thought at some point there, someone would have said, let's stop the work before we even start the work on this pipeline and let's get the approvals first and let's see if we do in fact need to add a $9 million piece of equipment or if we can just do it with the pipeline, let's get all those approvals in place first before we even start the project. But no, they built the $5 million pipeline. Then, when it was left to the new council to actually activate that pipeline, to put effluent in that pipeline, DPE essentially said, you're dreaming. There's no way we're going to let you take the water out of the sewage treatment plant, the effluent out of that, take that across, put it on playing fields, over the aquifer, next to the river, to then essentially leach into the aquifer. You take that water out of your bores, put it into the water treatment plant. You're effectively sending sewage water to the community of Dubbo for them to drink. And if you want to do that, that's fine, but we need to do a lot more processing, and you need to go to the community and tell them they're possibly going to be drinking sewage water, treated sewage water. So let's go down that process if you want, but that's another $9 million. The government's not going to give us that. We don't have $9 million sitting around. So at the moment, we've got a $5 million pipeline sitting in the ground that can't be used for what it was originally designed to be used for. A complete lack of planning, a complete lack of process, a complete lack of any checks and balances. Now, our staff are going to do some extra work to see if there's some other way that we could use that pipeline. For example, it might be to take backwash water back up the pipeline in the opposite direction to some sporting fields. There might be some other uses there, but we'll be spending more money, more time, and trying to work out how we might possibly utilise something that really should never have been in this situation in the first place. That $5 million, Tony, could have been used for more bores or more bore fields or more pipes to other bores that we might have already had, but it was used for an effluent pipeline that was never going to get approved. In fact, I even spoke to a previous director of council, a previous director of engineering at council, who said that his advice in conversations, he was no longer employed by council, but in conversations with the director, was that we've had discussions with DPE before about using effluent water in other ways anywhere near an aquifer, and they've always said no. The way we use that water now is we send it to a property that council owns called Green Grove, which is way away from the aquifer and up north of Dubbo, and it's used there to help grow crops. So that's been approved, and that's been in place for over 20 years now. It's a good solution to take our effluent, our treated effluent, and use it there rather than pump it back into the river. So there was a whole process to go through there. You need to follow these processes, Tony. It just seems inconceivable that it hasn't been followed in this way.
Yes, well, good luck with sorting that out. Now, I think the public deserves to know, again, who were the people in charge, the management people who allowed this decision-making to happen. And I think, there needs to be accountability here as far as the public's concerned about these very, very badly executed projects and the mistakes made in both cases with what we've just discussed. But moving on from all of this now, Matthew, some good news, and that is to do with the new destination charging grant for EVs. Now, there's been six sites nominated to get some new infrastructure for that. I'm curious as to where some of these are going, but certainly we've got Wellington Library, Wellington Caves. We've got the Sir Roden Cutler Car Park in Mylene Street, Dubbo, the Elizabeth Park, Dubbo. We've got the Dubbo Visitor Information Centre, and God knows where you're going to put it at the Wellington Visitor Information Centre, but I'd be very curious to know.
So this is part of the process where the government, now the state government, is handing out grants to councils, and this is co-funded grant money, not 100% grant money, to put in destination charging. Obviously, EVs are slowly getting there, Tony, becoming more popular across the nation. And there is a huge amount of work that says that if you've got some EV chargers in your community, then tourists will not only travel to your community, but may actually just travel just for the joy of using an EV charger. They get in their electric cars and want to drive to places that have got EV chargers in place. So when that opportunity came up, obviously council is going to take advantage of that and put some applications in. The main part of this process for council was that we needed to go forward and give a priority listing to our staff to say, of the various sites that have been identified that would fit the criteria for the state government, which one of those do you want to put in at the highest priority? We'll put an application in, and we'll put an application in for all six, but we'll put a priority listing associated with that because we want to make sure that the government gives us as many as we can, but if we don't get all six, we want the ones that we think are the most important. So the number one listing there, or the number one priority that council decided on, was the Wellington Library. And even though you might not think of the library as a destination from a tourist perspective, we think the location of the library in the main street there of Wellington, and with a good car parking space there, we think that'd be a great place for a destination charger to have there. People plug in there and then they can spend some time in the CBD of Wellington. And they can visit the library. It's a great library in Wellington, but more about spending some money in the CBD of Wellington. The number two destination was Wellington Caves, and that lends itself to that destination charging simply because you do normally stop at the caves for a period of time. So why not stop at the caves and explore the caves, and while you're doing that, have your car charge up. The Willandra Street Council car park is the car park that's on the Newell Highway near Club Dubbo, above Sir Roden Cutler Park, a very popular tourist destination point already, so why not put some charging infrastructure in there, keep people there a bit longer. People sometimes park there and then go and explore Track-a-Riley Cycleway, so that'd be a great location as well. Elizabeth Park in Dubbo, Japanese Gardens, Botanic Gardens, Adventure Playground, a great spot already for tourists again. Let's keep them there a bit longer. Then the Dubbo Visitor Information Centre, and then last on the list is the Wellington Visitor Information Centre.
Okay. Well, Matthew, is there anything else you'd like to add after the last council meeting that we haven't covered?
I think probably the other important one, Tony, that would be worth mentioning would be the draft social media policy. Now, we already have a social media policy, and we base that on a draft that the state government had out last year, and we've effectively used that up till now, and we continue to use that. But the Office of Local Government updated their draft social media policy to be their final version of that. So we've taken a look at that and basically updated our policy based largely on the changes that they've made there. What I would like the community to do, because social media is such an important part of the way people communicate now, radio is incredibly strong, obviously, and people get a lot of their information from radio, but social media is something that people rely on a lot, especially for that instant update and the two-way flow of information from social media. So we'd love people to have a look at that policy. It is draft at the moment. It's out on public display, or will go out on public display. I'd like to hear feedback from the community, and then once that feedback comes through, we'll take that back to council and then finally ratify that version. But I think it is important that the community is aware of what council and councillors are adhering to in their policy, and to give some feedback on that to make sure it does fit what the community expects from their council and their councillors.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Matthew. We've been talking to the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, Matthew Dickerson, on Binjang 91.5, and we certainly appreciate the time he's taken out on a Saturday to talk to us.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Matthew. And now it's back to all the great music and entertainment on Binjang 91.5.